In a groundbreaking turn of events, the United States has shifted its stance at the United Nations Security Council towards a more pro-Palestinian position, shocking Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and signaling a potential re-evaluation of U.S. Israel relations. In this highly informative and in-depth video, we explore the deep history of U.S. Israel relations, the political and strategic factors behind this shift, and what it means for the future of Israel, Palestine, and the broader Middle East. Discover how Netanyahu's hardline policies, Israel's weakening moral standing on the global stage, and the declining influence of the Jewish lobby in American politics are reshaping the dynamics in the region. We'll also explore the myth of Israel's nuclear deterrence and how Iran's growing influence could drastically alter the balance of power in the Middle East. This video provides detailed insights into the international backlash against Israel, Netanyahu's shock at U.S. foreign policy changes, and the implications of Israel's increasing isolation. Is this the beginning of the end for Israel's unchallenged dominance in the region? What are the global implications of these diplomatic shifts? Watch to find out. In an unprecedented and dramatic shift at the United Nations Security Council, the United States, a longtime ally of Israel, has adopted a more pro-Palestinian stance. This move has sent shockwaves through international diplomatic circles, most notably angering Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Historically, the US has been one of the most staunch defenders of Israel, often using its veto power to block any resolution that it deems to be unfavorable to Israeli interests. However, this sudden policy shift seems to mark a new chapter in US-Middle East relations, raising questions about the future of Israel's standing on the global stage and its strategic alliances. This shift comes against a backdrop of rising discontent within the United States and the West regarding the influence of the Jewish lobby, which many believe has dominated the narrative on Israel's political standing for far too long. Netanyahu's recent actions, particularly his hardline policies and increasingly authoritarian rhetoric, have also alienated many of Israel's traditional allies. The US, now wary of defending a state whose leadership seems to show little regard for international opinion, has begun reconsidering its unconditional support. To understand the full significance of this event, it's essential to look at the intricate dynamics within the UNSC. For decades, Palestine has sought full recognition from the international community. Despite gaining observer status, which allows them to participate in debates, full membership has been elusive. Historically, this has been due to opposition from the US and other Western powers, which under the influence of the Israeli lobby, viewed Palestinian statehood as a threat to Israel's security. The United States' refusal to support Palestine's bid for full UN membership in the past, despite growing global sympathy for the Palestinian cause, had reinforced the perception of US bias toward Israel. However, in recent years, attitudes within the US have slowly shifted, especially as human rights organizations and even some Jewish American groups began to question Israel's policies, particularly the expansion of settlements in the West Bank and the blockade of Gaza. It is in this context that the US's surprising decision to abstain rather than veto a recent UNSC resolution on Palestine shocked the international community. While the US did not openly endorse Palestinian statehood in this particular vote, its neutrality was seen as a major departure from past policy and was widely interpreted as a signal that the US was no longer willing to unconditionally protect Israeli interests at the expense of Palestinian rights. Netanyahu's immediate reaction was one of outrage. The Israeli Prime Minister has long prided himself on his close relationships with American leaders, particularly former President Donald Trump, who enacted numerous pro-Israel policies, such as recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the US embassy there. Netanyahu, in his public speeches, often emphasizes Israel's supposed invincibility, and he portrays himself as the leader who has kept Israel strong in a hostile region. However, this new stance by the US exposes a significant vulnerability in Netanyahu's leadership: Israel's growing isolation. While Israel has successfully built diplomatic relations with countries like the UAE and Bahrain through the Abraham Accords, Its relationship with its most important ally, the United States, is showing signs of strain. Netanyahu's arrogance, often displayed in his dismissive attitude toward international criticism, appears to be backfiring. His disregard for negotiations with Palestine and his hawkish policies have created an environment where even Israel's closest allies are reconsidering their positions. This moment serves as a wake-up call for Netanyahu and his government. Israel's aggressive policies toward the Palestinians, coupled with Netanyahu's unyielding political stance, have eroded its moral high ground on the international stage. What once seemed like an unbreakable bond between the US and Israel is now in question. The shift in US policy at the UNSC is emblematic of a broader disillusionment with Israel's leadership and its continued occupation of Palestinian territories. One of the most persistent myths surrounding Israel is its supposed military invincibility, bolstered by a widely believed narrative that Israel possesses a powerful nuclear arsenal. Israel has neither confirmed nor denied the existence of nuclear weapons, maintaining a policy of ambiguity. However, many analysts believe that Israel developed nuclear capabilities decades ago, positioning itself as a formidable power in the Middle East. This has been used as a deterrent, particularly against nations like Iran, which Israel claims is pursuing nuclear weapons of its own. But recent reports suggest that Israel's nuclear capabilities may not be as advanced as previously thought. While the Jewish lobby in the United States has successfully crafted a narrative that portrays Israel as a strong nuclear power capable of deterring any regional threat, evidence suggests that this might be more posturing than reality. Iran, on the other hand, has made significant advancements in its nuclear program, prompting concerns from the international community. The fear of a nuclear-armed Iran has been one of Netanyahu's primary talking points. He has often portrayed Israel as being on the verge of annihilation, using this narrative to justify aggressive policies and rally international support. But the reality may be that Israel's nuclear arsenal, if it exists at all, is not the game-changer Netanyahu has led the world to believe it is. This revelation weakens Israel's strategic position in the region and undermines its long-standing rhetoric of existential threat. Iran and the changing Middle East landscape. While Israel has been busy maintaining a facade of strength, Iran has steadily grown as a regional power. Despite crippling sanctions and international isolation, Iran has expanded its influence throughout the Middle East, supporting proxy groups in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. Its nuclear program, which Israel has repeatedly tried to sabotage, is closer than ever to reaching the threshold for weapons capability. This shift in power dynamics has not gone unnoticed. Many Arab states, historically hostile to Israel, have softened their stance towards it due to their shared fear of Iran's growing influence. But with Iran's progress in nuclear technology and Israel's diplomatic blunders, this balance is changing. The perception of Israel as an impenetrable fortress is crumbling. Netanyahu's repeated warnings about Iran now sound more like fear-mongering than legitimate concerns, especially when viewed in light of his government's inability to win over the international community. The growing frustration with Netanyahu's leadership is not confined to Israel's immediate neighbors or adversaries. Many in the West, particularly in Europe, are beginning to view Israel as a liability. Netanyahu's confrontational style and disregard for international norms have alienated Israel from many of its former allies. Even in the United States, the once sacred alliance with Israel is being questioned. The Jewish lobby's declining influence. For decades, the Jewish lobby in the United States, primarily represented by organizations like AIPAC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has wielded significant influence over American foreign policy. Through lobbying, political donations, and a powerful media presence, these organizations have ensured that US policy remained staunchly pro-Israel, regardless of the administration in power. But recent developments suggest that this influence is waning. As the international community becomes more critical of Israel's treatment of Palestinians, the unwavering support that Israel has historically enjoyed is fading. Younger generations of Americans, including Jewish Americans, are increasingly sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. progressive politicians like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have openly criticized Israeli policies, and calls for conditioning U.S. military aid to Israel on its human rights record are gaining traction. The shift in U.S. policy at the UNSC could be seen as a direct result of this changing sentiment. The Biden administration, which has been more critical of Netanyahu than previous administrations, seems to be responding to the growing call for a more balanced approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The influence of the Jewish lobby, long seen as unassailable, is starting to crack under the pressure of public opinion and international scrutiny. Israel at a crossroads. A diplomatic crisis. Israel now finds itself at a crossroads. Netanyahu's policies, once hailed as bold and necessary, are increasingly seen as reckless and counterproductive. The shock of the United States' shift at the UNSC is just the latest in a series of blows to Netanyahu's standing, both domestically and internationally. His arrogance, once a hallmark of his leadership, is now perceived as a liability. The world is no longer willing to blindly support Israel, and Netanyahu's dismissive attitude towards diplomacy has left Israel more isolated than ever. The era of unquestioned U.S. support for Israel may be coming to an end. The diplomatic crisis triggered by the U.S.'s pro-Palestinian stance at the UNSC is likely just the beginning of a broader re-evaluation of Israel's role in the international community. Netanyahu, who has long relied on his relationship with the U.S. to bolster his domestic standing, may soon find that the political landscape has shifted beneath his feet. Conclusion: the end of an era? As the U.S. moves toward a more balanced approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the days of Israel being able to rely on the unconditional support of its most powerful ally may be over. Netanyahu, who has governed with an air of invincibility, will now have to face the consequences of his policies. Israel's aggressive stance, coupled with its growing isolation, has left it vulnerable. The image of Israel as a regional powerhouse with nuclear capabilities that could deter any threat has been exposed as largely a myth. In reality, Israel is a small state with limited resources, and its influence is heavily dependent on its alliances. With the US and other Western nations growing tired of Netanyahu's hardline approach and the Jewish lobby's diminishing influence, Israel faces a future filled with uncertainty. The question now is whether Netanyahu and Israel's leadership will recognize the need for change. Will they adjust their policies to reflect the new geopolitical realities? Or will they double down on their confrontational stance, further isolating themselves from the international community? The future of Israel hangs in the balance, and the decisions made in the coming years will determine whether the country can adapt to a rapidly changing global environment or whether it will continue down a path of increasing isolation and vulnerability. For Netanyahu, this moment marks a potential turning point, one where the arrogance of past successes must give way to a more pragmatic and cooperative approach if Israel is to secure its place in the world.